Thank you, Jesse. My name is Boervi Shah. I am course 10, class of 2002, now doing nothing really related to chemical engineering and steeped deeply in the world of energy efficiency. Welcome today. I'm really glad to see such a sizable crowd. This is a very timely topic, especially for us Californians leading the way for the rest of America. We have an exciting group of panelists with diverse perspectives across the industry, from residential to commercial, storage, as well as the utility being represented. I must divulge I do work for PG&E, but I am not as informed as our expert panelists, and I am also open ears to hear what they have to share with us. One of my connections to this topic is really understanding how I am passionate about energy efficiency, being first in the loading order, doing everything we can to reduce consumption before we build new generation, including storage. And so what is the impact of increasing renewables on our grid, costs dropping, as well as costs of storage dropping, and the greater ability for us to manage distributed energy resources? And what is that going to do to energy efficiency? That's one of my questions for tonight. But there are many more questions and implications of robust storage capabilities, which we'll let Jeff handle. So Jeff Byron is our moderator tonight. He has over 40 years of experience in the industry on the policy side as well as the technology side. He is a Stanford alum, but we still welcome him here amongst us. And he's a former energy commissioner. So Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Paravi.
Hold on one second.
Sure. Listen, thank you so much for having me back. About a year ago, I moderated a presidential debate here with PARC. Were there any of you that were here for that? Well, it's kind of you to say, but I hope we don't do for energy storage what we did for presidential elections. So, you know what? I think I'll talk from up here just because the notes come up and it's easier. I'm gonna do a few introductory remarks, and I apologize to my panelists. I hope this will be helpful to you. Is this just as loud if I talk from here? Yes. I heard a yes and a no. Okay. So what I want to do is give some background on energy storage so everybody might have a good sense of what we're talking about here. Let me go back for a second. So to help our panelists out, let me just ask a few questions to the audience, and if you wouldn't mind help by a show of hands, give them a sense of who you are, and I think it'll help them to direct their comments as well. First of all, Stanford got mentioned. Anybody here have an MIT affiliation? No, raise your hand, please. So not everybody, that's always good. How many of you work in or have a really good understanding of the utility industry? Lot of hands. Oh, and even Dr. Strauss rose his hand on that. Let's see. Who sees a new opportunity or a growing opportunity for energy storage going forward here? Wow. Anybody here who would say they're uncertain about the energy storage market opportunity? Good. These are the folks we need to talk to. Good. Well, and it's good. You know, the doubting Thomas or the folks that are here to learn is always a good thing. I remember one of the questions I asked during the presidential debate amongst everybody there, very well informed last year, was who might change their vote as a result of what they hear tonight? No hands went up. Okay. So, panelists, based upon my experience with this group and the pre-questions that I was given, I think you can assume you've got a pretty well-informed audience here and some key decision makers. So, what we're going to do is we'll do some introductory remarks from each of the panelists after I've given some background here. We'll make sure we reserve plenty of time for discussion. We'll go to Q&A from the audience, and we'll finish promptly at 9:25 so that you can close. I hate to see people walk out. Who needs to leave at 9:30? Yeah. Okay, so we got a couple. All right, well, anyhow, that's our plan. So we'll do the best we can to stick to it. So let me just give you a little bit of background here. for those that don't know, there are other ways to integrate renewables on the grid, and I just wanted to take a moment to go through what we've done traditionally. Think of this as the geography issue here. Regional coordination among the ISOs and the RTOs, the independent system operators and the regional transmission operators, is one of the ways that we can mix resources, intermittent resources on the grid. Then we've got the diversity opportunity, and we look at diversifying our resources in terms of geothermal, wind, solar, because they're not all operating at the same time. We can also integrate renewables on the grid by being a little flexible with the load, and Todd might talk a little bit about this. Your local utility oftentimes comes up with different programs that provide incentives for you to shift that load off of peak period times. And then we also have flexible generation. Those are the kind of machines that can start quickly or ramp up quickly in order to meet demand when solar or wind trail off or start quickly themselves. And then, of course, the new emerging opportunity is all around energy storage, and we'll talk a little bit about the two types of use for integrating renewables, energy arbitrage, and the ancillary services. And of course, what's driving this, I think you all know, the PV and the solar PV and the wind installations are just skyrocketing. Of course, the total is still quite small, but the growth is just phenomenal. When I think of when I started on the commission in 2005 or 6, it's now 1 to 2 orders of magnitude larger per year than it was only 12 years ago. And the forecast for the energy storage development in the United States is also growing at a spectacular rate. This study was done earlier this year, I believe, for the Energy Storage Association's annual conference in April. And you can see that there's a pretty good mix here between residential, commercial and industrial, and utility applications. And in fact, I'll show you something a little bit later about some projections that show that stuff that's not utility may be growing the fastest. And what does this mean? It means a lot of money. We're now talking about as much as over $3 billion market in the year 2022. This is an incredible increase. It's a tenfold increase from just last year. But what's really driving this market growth? I hope it's obvious to all of you, but if it's not, I have a feeling our panelists will talk to this a little bit. Costs are coming down considerably. And I'll just throw some of these up. These are just different headlines that I've pulled off the internet, just in the last day or so, since January 1st. And there's literally dozens of these that give you a sense that who the major players are in this space. And again, I wasn't trying to be partial or anything. I just picked a variety of them. The international markets, Europe is getting very interested in energy storage. The military is interested in energy storage. Of course, Tesla's name's probably going to come up once or twice tonight. And you can also see that there are studies that indicate by 2030 we could hit as much as 125 gigawatts of energy storage. These numbers, if you'd have told them to me a couple of years ago, I would have asked you, what are you smoking? Okay? So,
I got a quick question.
no questions right now. Look, we're going to continue. We're going to continue, please, until we get through it. Hold your questions till later.
Let's try that.
So there are two types of renewable. Am I okay here, Doug? Thank you. There are two types of renewable integration services that can be provided by Energy Service. I'm just trying to give you a little background here because I think our panelists will talk to a lot of these things. So let me just separate the two out. Most of you are all familiar with this one. This is the long duration services, or what we call load shifting, when renewables are generating, when the power might be more valuable later on. And I think you'll hear some of our panelists talk about short duration services, or the little figure over on the right shows shimmy. And these are some of the things that are coming into play now on the utility side of the meter as well, and hopefully Todd will speak to this. And both of these services can be provided by a number of different types of storage. I've listed a few here: the lithium-ion batteries, flow batteries, pumped hydro, and maybe hydrogen. There are, of course, others. So here's another key factor that's driving this. This was a recent study that was done by E3 I think this came out earlier this year, and that is, you may all know in California, we've got a 50% renewable goal by 2030. So this is pretty significant, and you can see what happens as you get between 30 to 50%. You start, by their analysis, having to curtail a lot of energy storage. And the profit margins for these companies and these operations are tied up in those numbers. We can't afford to curtail this stuff, or it just doesn't work. So this is one of the other key factors I wanted to mention. Also, there's two distinct markets for energy storage. There should be no surprise to you here. One of them is behind the meter or customer-owned energy storage. This is typically to offset demand charges, but it could be for other reasons, and I think some of our panelists will talk to this. In fact, I was just listening to your podcast, Barry, earlier this week. The way Barry characterizes this is think of behind the meter as saving money, because that's what motivates customers to do that. But then, of course, there's utility or third-party owned, which adds to your rates. But of course, we expect our utilities, like PG&E, to offset those. And the only reason that they would do these projects is because it's avoiding other costs. So Todd will speak to that, and if I've created anything that bothers him, all the better, because he'll straighten us out. This is just an indication of where some of these storage capabilities fit with two major characteristics, duration and power. And you can see up all the way in the upper right-hand corner, pumped hydro. This has been the one that we've used primarily in the past, and you can see for good reason. But it's very difficult to cite these, at least in the United States. But that doesn't stop China. I listened to a presentation just a couple of weeks ago by Xiang Liu, the Executive Vice President of the State Grid Corporation of China. By 2020, they will build an additional 37 gigawatts of pump storage. 37 gigawatts of pump storage. So what is most of the energy storage that's being added at this time? It's about 97, 98% lithium-ion batteries. So I think we want to know from our panel, where's this going? Is that what it's going to be, or is there something else that might emerge? Okay, so let me just wrap this little brief summary up. The energy storage is really creating a disruptive change right now. I think there's probably three things in my mind that are just really wonderful transitions that we're in the middle of. But without going into the other two, this is one of them. Continued growth of photovoltaics and wind is lowering costs, and we're going to see continued dramatic growth of energy storage. Regulators, and some of my panelists may not agree with this, but I think regulators for the most part are adopting policies and beginning to recognize the value of energy storage. And this is good news because it allows providers of these projects more opportunities, more revenue streams, and the value proposition is more attractive. It's really upsetting what we call the integrated resource planning process. This is how utilities and the Public Utility Commission determine what generation resources are needed in the future. We have developers that are putting projects online in less than 90 days. I'll tell you, we can't even do the paperwork to site a power plant project in less than a couple of years. So, and Todd was telling me about an example earlier about interconnection difficulties. So this is really changing the process on how we plan, and utilities are looking much more closely at this. But energy storage also represents just a shift in terms of putting lowest cost opportunity on the grid versus what we've done in the past, and that's adding more generation, which costs more money. So this is a pretty disruptive opportunity. In fact, I'd like to characterize it by showing my bias. We now have the holy grail product offering, and that is dispatchable renewables. This is something I never thought we would see in my lifetime. So I think I'll stop with that and just introduce briefly our panelists. Would you please pull up their resume? We did too many resumes. I should say we did too many bios for them, so we'll use the official bios. But let me just say a little bit about each of them as I ask them to think about their introductory remarks. I've known Barry for about 12 years. But actually, I haven't told you this, but I heard of you before I met you in Budapest, Hungary. Well, it seems I was on vacation. I was traveling with someone who was quite upset about your desire to install too many photovoltaics on the roof of your building in Los Gatos. Barry has been a big advocate of renewable energy for a long time, and the city attorney was none too pleased about your wanting to put all that photovoltaic on the roof. You know, it's unsightly. We've changed a little bit here.
We lost in one.
Yeah. Kate McGinnis is the Western Director of Marketing for AES Energy Storage, and she's got a very strong background with an MBA, and also she's a technologist who's really shown her dedication to this industry in recent years. You're involved in local organizations and California's Energy Storage Association, correct? So I'm really eager to hear what you have to say. Dr. Strauss? This is one of the brightest individuals I know. We'll limit it to PG&E, but still, very bright man. So listen, Todd, don't do what you always used to do for me at the Energy Commission. Don't dumb it down tonight, okay? Give them both barrels. You did too. Give them both barrels. Tell them about the benefits, but also the challenges that this represents for you as an investor-owned utility. And Kelly Warner is the president of I want to say the full name because AMS always means something else to me. Advanced Microgrid Solutions, a relatively new company and a high flyer in this space. And in fact, Kelly's got a lot of executive experience in the energy business. I think he's not quite as old as I am, but he's been doing this for a long time. Kelly, you've joined a great company, and I know two of the founders very well, Susan Kennedy and the late Jackie Pfannenstiel, whom I worked with in the Schwarzenegger administration. So Barry, why don't you take a few minutes? We'll go right down the line. I know you may have some material you want to present. These are just introductory remarks to kind of, for you to get to know them. Then we'll get into the discussion and then Q&A. Please.
Jeff, you have the clicker for Barry? You can just
I can use this, I think, right?
You can click from your seat or talk from up there.
Let me talk from
Yeah, whichever.
All right. All right, great. Thanks for that kind introduction, Jeff. I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on what we do at Cinnamon Energy Systems. And forgive me, because we've been called Cinnamon Solar for 5 or 6 years, and then we're in the process of rebranding because so many of our customers are interested in storage solutions. So basically what we do for our residential customers, kind of below the line, we're putting in a solar system that's going to reduce the kilowatt hour consumption, and we're starting to put in batteries, which theoretically could help them economically, but I'll talk about that in a minute. It doesn't really save a lot of money on the residential side. But it does provide backup power, which is an emotional benefit that's really important to homeowners. On the commercial side, obviously, we're able to do that peak demand reduction, which is something that companies value very highly. Now, as engineers, we kind of learn to solve problems. That's problem sets, right? You guys remember that from MIT. But in business, sometimes you're faced with a situation where somebody gives you a problem and you say, gee, what's the real problem there? So I was kind of taking a step back and taking a look at what this duck curve really means and what caused that duck curve. And the duck curve really started to stretch out when we started to hit our stride on the RPS portfolio. We put in a lot of utility solar, so much utility solar that we're getting to the point at which the cost of energy might be negative, and the developers are going to have to pay the utility to take that power. It's kind of crazy. And Jeff, you kind of mentioned something interesting. Maybe we're going to move towards a storage portfolio standard, which is going to solve the problem of a too successful RPS. We'll see how that works out. But I kind of look at this duck curve as a problem from too much solar being delivered to customers as opposed to customers developing that asset themselves. Second problem is an unreliable local grid. And this is something that anecdotally I've seen a lot of. Personally, I've had 5 blackouts over the last 12 months in my house, and I live in the suburbs. So the fundamental problem is our local grid infrastructure wasn't designed for EVs drawing as much power as perhaps was originally supplied to the house, air conditionings, new appliances, and we're more dependent on electricity than ever. My hot water heater has an electronic pilot light. My gas stove has an electronic pilot light. I can't keep my children happy without their electronics, and the heat doesn't work in the house because fireplaces are illegal now. They're electric gas fireplaces. So that's changed. And then also we're seeing situations in which the electric rates kind of keep going up. Now, when I think about my 20 years doing solar, almost solar here in California, my biggest competitor has not been other solar companies. My biggest competitor has always been PG&E. And I have to say that out of all the utility districts that I've worked with in the country, without a doubt, PG&E is the most cooperative, the best utility to work with when it comes to solar. I don't have national storage experience. They've been great, but their business interests are not aligned with what we who are providing behind-the-meter storage and solar assets are. So I think it's good that we've got some competitors here, and I'm going to be kind of waving the behind-the-meter flag. So really quickly, what the economics look like for rooftop solar, it's become a fairly mature market. Utility-owned solar is going in at about 4 cents a kilowatt hour. We're providing systems for homeowners and businesses in the 6 cents a kilowatt hour range. But then when you look at the average price of electricity in California, you can kind of come to this number pretty easily by dividing divide the utility's total revenue from supplying energy into the number of kilowatt hours they provide. It's about 20 or 21 cents. So there's a big gap between what it costs to generate the power and what they're charging for it, and that's because there's a lot of infrastructure. Now, when you look at energy storage systems, this is kind of an interesting number. For commercial customers, there's some good payback because you're able to reduce the demand charges, and that's quite valuable. We're seeing paybacks in the 3 to 6 year range, and I'm focusing on small commercial. We're not talking about humongous megawatt systems. These are 100 kilowatt systems with maybe 200 or 300 kilowatt hours of batteries. For residential customers, the payback isn't really there for energy storage yet. Even on the biggest, where you're looking at a kind of a big gap, and I'll get to that in a minute, between peak and off-peak rates, it's hard to justify using your battery to arbitrage energy based on the lifespan of the battery. I'll talk about that in a minute. But no doubt in my mind that storage behind the meter is going to be cheaper than utility storage. That's because the batteries are going to be on wheels. Many people drove here with batteries, and as soon as that electric vehicle can exchange power back and forth, you're going to see a continued growth in the industry because you're going to be able to discharge your car into your home when you need that power. All right, well, I would never consider doing a presentation in front of a technical MIT kind of audience without some kind of equation. So if you're interested in the payback of a battery for a home or a business, it's very, very simple, but you can just, when you get to the point at which the savings from the battery are greater than the cost of the battery, then you're going to have a market that's going to start growing. This is really easy to calculate. You look at the total kilowatt hours that the battery has in it over its, say, 10-year lifetime, times the gap between the peak and the off-peak time, times the efficiency loss, and that's got to be greater than the cost. Right now, even under optimistic scenarios, this 30 cents a kilowatt hour for a home is the gap between the EV night rate and the EV peak daytime rate. You're still looking at a battery system that has to be less than $6,000. And they're just about at that level, maybe still a little bit higher than that. You can get batteries for a lot less, but remember they have to be installed and they have to last. Now I'm going to come back to the duck curve, but first, if you're a vegetarian, please close your eyes. There's more than one way to skin a duck. Just had to flash that by quickly. So in my view, there are two different approaches. We can be developing utility assets that are going to solve that duck curve with utility scale solar storage, or we can start to deploy those assets in a more incentivized way for behind the meter storage. And I kind of look at these three problems that we have with the duck curve. In both cases, we're going to need a lot of gas peaker plants. But behind the meter storage is going to be very, very cost effective once that starts to deploy in larger quantities and once the systems become standardized, which they are not yet. As far as the reliability of the local grid, we either need a lot of local grid upgrades to handle much, much more intensive power going back and forth between buildings and the grid, or we're going to see situations in which there's gradual load defection because it is actually pretty cost effective to put in solar behind the meter, and storage is going to be the same way. And finally, you look at what's going to happen to electric rates. If the utilities are buying those assets and putting those assets in, they're going to recover those costs through higher rates. And the defection issue comes up when customers can say, gee, I can put in solar and storage myself and save more money that way. So that was just my kind of introduction to kind of get things going, and time for the next panelist.
Thank you, Barry. Kate, you want to go up or you want to sit? Oh, yeah, let's clap for Barry. Now you're stuck. You have to clap for everyone.
First page. Can we go to the first page?
Yes. Sorry, I thought that was right. Was it the last page?
That's the last page.
Oops.
So
I gave you a punchline.
it's okay.
Click on the green circle.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about AES. AES is a global power company. We're in 17 countries. In some places, we are the utility. Here in the U.S., we own Indianapolis Power and Light and Dayton Power and Light. We have Eletropaulo, the utility that serves Sao Paulo in Brazil, and a handful of others in other countries. We're also an IPP. We were pretty early to that market, doing some of the earliest power purchase agreements. And then about 10 years ago, we started our energy storage business. My colleagues saw an opportunity, I've only been with the company about 3 years, saw an opportunity to put storage onto the grid. They started out looking at electric vehicles and then said, well, maybe we don't need the car. And tested out 2 megawatts at Indianapolis Power and Light. It was about 2 containers. They were about 15 minutes of duration. And then since then, we've built a whole bunch of projects. This is a sampling of kind of our current timeline. And we've gone from doing small, those small 2 megawatt projects. We did a handful of those. Moved on to doing our first commercial project in the middle of the desert in Chile. It's really about as remote as that picture makes it seem. It's at a substation that's at a critical point in the Chilean grid, and the system is basically providing spinning reserves. It's a 15-minute system. It gives enough time for other resources to ramp up and come online. And the northern Chilean grid it's a pretty isolated system. It's obviously not an actual island, but it's practically an island in electrical terms. From that point, we moved into projects here in the U.S. And so this is a project in West Virginia. It's co-located with a wind farm, but it actually interacts independently with the grid. And so it's providing frequency regulation services in the PJM system. And so it's bidding these services daily, hourly, minute by minute, actually. And in its initial years, it was saving about $20 million a year. Now there's tons of frequency regulation projects in PJM, probably too many. The prices have collapsed, and that's what happens when a market is more successful than, but it's good for the customers. Not as great for us. More recently, as the cost of storage has been declining, we've been able to move to longer and longer duration systems. This is a 30 megawatt project, 4-hour duration. Now think back, I said that first project, it was about a megawatt in a container for about 15 minutes. This one of these is 1.25 megawatts, and it's a 4-hour duration. So really managed to condense the footprint. This 30 megawatt 4-hour system is on about an acre, and it sits in San Diego, in Escondido, in San Diego County, next to an SDG&E substation. And so this was built in response to the Aliso Canyon challenges from last year. And so it was contracted, it was selected in about 3 weeks. We still did competitive bidding. There were a handful of companies that were participating. It was selected within 3 weeks. We contracted in another 3 weeks, which was just crazy. And I didn't sleep much. And then built it in about 6 months. The commission actually did its part. They approved it in a month, which is also kind of unheard of in California. So.
Wait, which commission?
The CPUC. So, there were a number of projects. SCE did another three other projects in that same time frame. So a lot of 4-hour storage kind of came onto the system at the end of last year and the beginning of this year. Down the line, we're working on building a project in Long Beach. This is a 100 megawatt, 4-hour project. It was contracted back in 2014 to meet local capacity needs in the LA basin that kind of arose from the retirement of San Onofre, as well as the upcoming retirements of a lot of once-through cooling gas plants. And so this project was selected in an all-source solicitation. It was competing against other gas plants, other types of projects, and Southern California Edison wound up procuring over 250 megawatts, including some with Kelly's company as well. So big milestone for the industry. But on the timelines that often, these things happen when they aren't emergencies, this one won't be built until 2020. So we're also putting in projects to act as a distribution or transmission alternative. This is a picture of a project that we built in Arizona for Arizona Public Service, and it's 2 megawatts. It was put into a system in an area where they have a really high solar penetration. And so it's helping to provide some services on the distribution feeder where it can help kind of stabilize the grid and provide some of these services. We're also building another project that's a 4-hour system at the end of a long radial line. And so that's going to help, also for APS, that's going to help them avoid having to upgrade this 20-mile line to meet increasing capacity that they expect, but you have to make, if you're going to make a really long investment in a transmission line, you're predicting that growth before it actually happens. So the storage is a great way to help either postpone doing something that you're not certain that you're going to need, and it can be put in incrementally. This is another transmission alternative that we built in Indianapolis. And then finally, one of the things that you were talking about, we've contracted for a project in Hawaii where the 5 hours of storage will be paired with solar to provide kind of a longer duration energy delivery that can meet the system needs. At the end of the year, I'll be with a different company. We're forming a joint venture with Siemens. So I will soon to be working for a company named Fluence.
Thank you, Kate. Dr. Strauss, go right ahead and start talking. She'll bring up your presentation.
Turn on the screen. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
Oh.
No, that's
No,
better.
yeah, no.
We don't need the energy right now.
Yeah.
So let's see. Course 18, class of 84. I took 1803 and 10250. Spent a fair amount of time in E40 on the first floor. And spent a fair amount of time in building 20. I can't remember whether it was wing D or E. And I saw some pictures recently of a really nice renovation of building 2, particularly that new additional top floor. All right, did I establish my MIT chops? All right. So let me now establish my PG&E chops. Raise your hand if you're a PG&E customer. Okay. So I see a lot of customers here, so really appreciate your business. And we can talk more about some of the nuances about the services that you take from PG&E and we provide you. Okay? Also, to establish my PG&E chops, is anyone here from the California Public Utilities Commission? One person. Okay. Are you a commissioner? Are you a commissioner's advisor? Are you a director or deputy director of any division in the PUC? Are you with ORA?
Do you want to say who you're with? It'll make it shorter, I think.
That'd be great. I think we're good, but can you say who you're with? Water Division. Oh, perfect. So here's why. Because actually, if there was a commissioner present, or an advisor, or a director, or a deputy director, there are reporting requirements I have to ensure that all communications are appropriate and transparent and publicly disclosed. It's one of the elements of doing business as a public utility. And I'm comfortable with that. Just want to make sure you're all aware. So I've established some PG&E chops.
I'm party to opposition to your application.
Excellent. We can talk more about that. That's fine in this context. I want to have your understanding of the message right now is basically the grid is the enabling platform. We have energy storage for renewable integration. Lots of stuff about energy storage here tonight, renewables. Let's focus on that last word, integration. The grid is the enabling platform for all this stuff to happen. For all the stuff you want to do in your homes, in your businesses, at our cool Googleplex, and all these facilities, for two-way flows from batteries, mobile sources, whatever. Without the grid, this doesn't happen. Now, or for the foreseeable future. And there's a lot of value in the grid, and our job is to deliver and turn that into value for you, our customers, and for all of California to meet California's climate ambitions and economic ambitions, and all of our ambitions we have in California. PG&E is the integrator. What we do is basically use that grid, that enabling platform, to basically do the things from running bucket trucks, emergency response services, control centers, procurement, thinking about institutions and rules and regulations and safety to make sure that the energy you get, electricity, and also natural gas, is delivered to you safely, reliably, affordably, and in a clean manner. This is California, so we add clean. Every utility across the country says safe, reliable, affordable. More and more they say clean. And California's been the leader in that respect. And PG embraces that vision, and we're here. We're glad to talk lots more about all the provocative things everyone's tossed out there already, but I'll wait for the Q&A to do that, Jeff.
Thank you, Dr. Strauss. Kelly, would you like to make any introductory remarks?
Okay, stand, just move around a little bit. So thank you all for the invitation. As a Williams and Stanford alum, I'm not sure how I got in here, but I must say I've always had a bit of an inferiority complex around MIT grads and feel even just a little bit smarter standing here right now with you all. So thank you. So I'm president of Advanced Microgrid Solutions. We're a 4-year-old company. We refer to ourselves as a distributed energy resource platform company. And what we do is we develop, aggregate, optimize, and manage fleets of distributed energy storage projects and other DERs. Most of our installations are behind the meter, so we'll probably talk a little bit about the differences between front of the meter and behind the meter applications, but our MO is mostly around aggregating behind the meter assets. The company was founded by, Jeff had said, Susan Kennedy and Jackie Fanningsdale, two very prominent women in California, sometimes referred to as the midwives of the duck curve. They were very involved with the development of a lot of the renewable energy policies during the Schwarzenegger administration and other times in California. And when they founded AMS, it was really around a thesis that their success was going to wreak havoc with Todd's company and other utilities in terms of the challenges of integrating all of this rooftop solar and other distributed energy resources. I met Susan about 4 years ago. I've been in the energy services industry my whole career, so I've been dealing with the challenges of how do you finance and scale up these distributed projects, starting off in energy efficiency and then renewables and now storage. When we were talking about how to structure this new company around helping the utilities integrate all these DERs, we really focused on the rapid advancements in energy storage and then how to make it scalable and bankable. And that's been a big focus around what we're doing at Advanced Microgrid Solutions. Our first projects are down in Southern California. We're building right now, in fact, we just launched the first phase of it, a 50 megawatt, 200 megawatt hour distributed virtual power plant using Tesla lithium-ion batteries. And I can go into more details about this later on in the show, but basically across 125 different commercial industrial sites, all tied to certain substations in the grid in Southern California that are absolutely imploding due to a lack of local generation and the duck curve issues of all the rooftop solar. We'll be using our software platform to coordinate and orchestrate the charging and discharging of all these distributed systems to help the SCE and the California ISO manage voltages and loads down in this area. So it's really exciting. One of the the proof in the pudding is that we were able to execute a $200 million equity financing with Macquarie Capital around building out this project, and that was at the time the largest energy storage financing to date. And once again, this was at the time was a 3-year-old company with brand new technology, kind of a crazy business model, and being able to go to a very conservative investor and ultimately put together an equity financing like that is quite an accomplishment, not only for AMS but for the industry. And since then, we've done a 10-year term debt financing with CIT, which is, any of you in the financial world know that's really the hardest thing to do, is to layer in debt into these new kinds of projects. So I think being a pioneer, we get to experience a lot of the early challenges of figuring out the market rules and things like this about how to ultimately set the table for this kind of a technology to be rapidly adopted by the industry so that you're going to see mass deployments and things like that. So very excited about the future, and we'll love to talk to you more about it tonight.
Thank you, Kelly. Excellent. So we've covered a lot of ground already, and I want to make sure we try and get to some subjects. So the topics that I've got on my list are some of the barriers. I'd like to see if we can talk about outside the United States a little bit, possibly the technologies, markets. There's some interest in the financing aspect of that from some of the participants here. Maybe a little bit about the future, and we don't have a whole lot of time. So pithy, short answers are appreciated. And let's talk a little bit about the technology and any challenges that are presented there. I had a number of questions that I list there. Let me just categorize them this way. Do you see any problems with the grid handling more and more renewables? Do you see any problem with integrating 30, 50% renewables? There was a bill on the California's the legislative list this summer to try and go to 100%. So any problems?
I thought that was 100% carbon-free, not 100% renewables.
It may have changed.
It is an important distinction.
I'm sure it is. But the point is, there have been countries in Europe that have hit the 100% mark.
Actually, and here's the number's not 100%. We need to get to 125%.
And state why.
Why, right? Because when is it the energy from these renewables generated? What are the resources, and when do they need to be consumed? And so if we're moving energy from one time period to another, right, we need to store it, and it goes over line losses. Typically the 100% counts, we're counting generation, but against the retail load, there's some loss along. So when you consider line losses and the time element of storage, maybe 125% might be the number for 2075.
Okay, so write that down. PG&E says we can get to 125% renewables.
And so the question is, what does it take to get there, right? And so there are questions about technical feasibility. At the first cut, actually, it seems technically feasible. There are really important questions about transients on the electrical system when you're counting cycles. Right? Seconds. Any electrical engineers here do power systems? Okay. You know far more than I do. I'm a math guy. Okay. To me, it's all some complicated nonlinear optimization. But and so there are really important questions about feasibility there. But in the larger sense, if I ignore lots of the complicated elements of the AC flow and the transit, that's not the big issue. The bigger issue is what does it cost, and that is very much a matter of what's the slope of the trajectory to get there.
Okay, good. So go ahead. Kelly.
On the cost side, I mean, one of the things I've been amazed about just in the 4 years I've been in the industry is how rapidly costs are
in the energy storage industry.
Yes, and in the energy storage industry. I mean, you look at all these projections, you look what happened in solar, the market blew away any market projections that were. So we're all benefiting really from the electric vehicle industry in terms of battery manufacturing. But I think this idea of are these renewables really going to create problems for utilities? They are, and they won't if it's done in a coordinated, orchestrated fashion. And so I think that this whole, DERs can be a real benefit to the grid operators if they're done, in coordination with the distribution system operators. Whereas if you have all of these DERs working in an uncoordinated fashion, including energy storage, if energy storage is out there trying to arbitrage utilities' rate structures, it's just going to add to the conflicts on the grid, not resolve them.
Let's hear from the less follically challenged individual on the panel. Kate, do you see any problems technically with a higher integration, higher percentage integration of renewables?
Well, I think as you're seeing the grid change and the needs of the grid change as the mix of generation on the grid is changing. And so you're seeing pricing dynamics shift. And so while we may not have any technical problems keeping it together right now, you're seeing the price go negative during certain seasons of the year in the middle of the day.
Everybody understand what she means by price going negative?
The wholesale market price is going negative. In the middle of the day, especially at, say, like during the spring, for example, when you've got a sunny day, full sunny day, fairly long days, but no air conditioning run. Because it's pretty temperate out during that time of year, for example.
But the rest of that is the reason you continue to still generate is because of incentives like the production tax credit, correct?
There's a variety of reasons. So wind would continue to generate mostly because of the production tax credit. The utility scale solar may continue to generate depending on the structure of its contract. Rooftop solar, the utility has no control over, so it probably is continuing to generate. And so there's, a mix of pressures that are causing this. And so while the grid is going to continue to operate and be fine at this point, it's providing a different pricing dynamic that starts to push you towards different other types of technology that can help fix it, like energy storage. So,
Barry, do you want to add anything, or can I ask you another question?
You can ask another question.
So is it lithium-ion batteries at this point? Is that what you see going forward? And if so, are there going to be any limitations as a result of all these batteries we're going to make out of lithium?
It's from what I can see as far as established products, definitely going to be a lithium-ion business. It's superior to lead acid for all the reasons we know in terms of energy density and life cycle cost and ability to generate power, pull a lot of power out of it. The biggest advantage, one of the biggest advantages that lithium-ion has right now is the auto industry. We're just cranking those things out. The limiting factor, at least on the residential and the small commercial side, is the integration involved in putting a complete system together. They're not packaged systems. Tesla did a great job coming out with kind of the first package system, and now there's a bunch of other companies doing that. So on the residential side, if anybody's looking at putting in a system for backup power or energy arbitrage, which eventually will make sense, you just got to wait for those systems to become a little bit less expensive and make sure the incentives are there for them.
So you're not worried about lithium becoming a limited commodity?
I was kind of thinking about the analogy between lithium and silicon. And we may end up, it might be, there's going to be a 5-year period a few years from now where we may hit a shortage of lithium, just like we hit a shortage of silicon. The industry, the battery industry is obviously not coordinated. Neither was the solar industry. And everybody's building factories like no tomorrow with demand for the product. And then they find out that there's a upstream raw material that's limited. And that we may hit a wall on that in 5 years. It's hard to tell.
So AES Energy Storage, AMS, you both have agreements with a particular provider, correct?
We work with a number of different providers.
Good. So
yeah.
not just...
Yeah, we also do. We're agnostic, so we have multiple supply agreements.
Okay, good. So there is some competition in the marketplace other than just Tesla.
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Oh, we like that. Yeah.
All right. So so technically, is that where we are? Do you see us lithium-ion for the foreseeable future?
Well, we're a startup, so I'd say 3 years is a foreseeable future.
You're pretty far along as a startup.
I appreciate that one. Yes.
$300 million financing, and you're pretty far along.
I think we've built our platform to be agnostic. So we do have a preference for kind of a cell-based battery, but we have the ability to shift if something superior and cost-effective and commercially viable comes along. But for now, out probably at least the next 5-6 years, which is sort of the horizon that we're kind of thinking of real projects in, it's lithium-ion.
Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, and just kind of setting the clock back about 15 years in the solar industry from in the early part of 2004, there was about a dozen companies in the world making solar panels at rapidly increasing pace, and the Chinese were coming online. Within a period of about 6 months, they all hit the wall, and the pricing for solar panels went up by about 30 or 40%. So, in spite of contracts that people may have, the same thing happened in the solar industry. It's just going to hit the wall, and there could be a shortage.
It's just interesting to hear 3 years and 5 to 6 years, kind of the horizon, because I'm looking at 2050 and working backwards. Okay, I'm thinking about the 2030 goals that California's already set. So long term means something, or at least the horizon means something a little different depending upon the context, and I appreciate that as well. It's interesting because you mentioned earlier, Jeff, in your slide, you said, okay, what's driving all this growth in energy storage? And your answer was low cost. And I was like, I thought the answer was policy. There actually is a mandate in California for 1,280 megawatts of storage, actually for the investor-owned utilities and actually other load-serving entities, other providers, to actually acquire and put in place by 2024. So actually, and California is by far the largest storage market in the United States, and I believe still the world. You guys would know better than I at that. Certainly, when it came to solar, California is probably number 3. Germany went first, Spain went first, and California kind of benefited a little bit, And the way I see it, California customers, you, have greatly benefited on the solar side from federal tax credits and Chinese subsidies. And if we can get federal tax credits and Chinese subsidies for storage, then our customers will benefit as well. And so if the issue is the costs don't materialize in the same kind of way, I think, Jeff, you identified some other ways to integrate renewables, a larger geographic footprint, demand response, and other elements on the load side, portfolio diversity, a variety of other elements. And so there are a variety of, we need a portfolio of resources. Rather than focus on a particular technology or a particular project to do appropriate integration, we think actually from the portfolio perspective. So,
Yeah, I actually.
That's good. I'm not going to take the bait, though. He's baiting an energy commissioner on IOU policies. But what I'd really like to do is drill down a little bit on this notion, the first comment that he made, the first aspect of his comment. Forgive me, I'm forgetting what the issue was. Maybe I will take the bait.
There's cost
Yeah,
and policy.
So do we need the mandate? Are you seeing energy projects elsewhere than California? Can this be done without the subsidies, without the incentives, let's call them?
So none of our projects until, I guess, the earlier California ones, were benefiting from some kind of a mandate or subsidy. So that project in northern Chile, just based on how the market was set up and based on the needs of that particular location, we were able to find an economic project. And we've done 3 of them. So there's about 52 megawatts in northern Chile providing that same sort of service. The PJM market was also built up without subsidies. There was some rules in place that were reasonably favorable to storage, and so we started doing our first project around them. We worked with PJM to kind of adjust some of the rules to better credit storage for where it performed better than other resources. So in some markets where you can kind of adjust the rules to fairly benefit the attributes of the different systems. And what we're advocating for in a lot of places is not necessarily, mandates they're great for us, right? But what I really want to see is that utilities are including storage as a resource in their integrated resources planning, that they're getting up-to-date pricing on storage, and they're not using 4-year-old pricing when they kind of make up their mix. And then when they actually go to procure resources, I want them to identify what services they need and then run an all-source type of competition where a storage can participate, solar can compete, gas plant can compete, maybe not here because I don't know that we're going to build more here, but in locations that have are looking at other types of resources. I want to compete against that peaker, because if they really only need to run that peaker 4 days a year for half an hour, storage is a better option because you can do other things all year round with storage, and it'll be a more valuable asset.
Well,
In fact, Barry, let's give Kelly a chance to respond to the same question I asked just a moment earlier. Can you do it without any incentives?
Absolutely, and we're not. What we're looking for is access to markets, because storage has a number of really unique attributes. And when SoCal Edison went out for this all-source procurement to meet the needs of what they call the LCR area, this West LA basin, they looked at gas peakers, they looked at all different kinds of technologies. They over-acquired storage more than their mandate, more than the mandate they had, because the attributes of storage, the ability to site it, in an urban area where you're not going to be able to site a gas plant, and its fast response, and then companies like us that are figuring out how to monetize multiple benefit streams out of it, so that ultimately the effective price to the ratepayer for the value they're getting out of the storage asset is lower. So it's not really about incentives, it's about access to markets. But then I would also say, this is the utility industry. I mean, do you really think any dramatic change is going to happen without some kind of either a policy push or a regulatory push or whatever? I grew up in the energy efficiency industry, which is one of the great success stories in the whole utility industry. no way it would have happened without what's referred to as market transformation programs that basically try to prime the pump to get new ideas into the mix, because we're all humans. We'd like to do what we know how to do, and utility engineers especially like to do what they know how to do. So you need some kind of a push to get things going.
And Paravi referred to that earlier in her opening remarks about energy efficiency, and the loading order really was transformational. Who started that? California. Barry,
Art Rosenberg.
Yes.
Yeah. Barry, would you like to, the late Art Rosenfeld.
Art Rosenberg.
So we talk about policies, incentives, mandates. There's another policy called an electric rate. And it's something that becomes very contentious at the PUC, because you've got parties trying to argue at different things. And obviously the higher the electric rates are, the more money the utilities are going to make, and the more customers have to pay. But if we design the electric rates properly to reflect what the cost of service is, and possibly to reflect the fact that we've got too much energy in the middle of the day, I'm going to put a battery in my house or my commercial building so that I can absorb some of that really, really cheap energy in addition to what I'm generating from solar, and then I can sell it back in the evening when the grid needs it. So there's another model here. Part of the big challenge is we have a business model in the utility industry that conflicts with allowing customers to acquire their energy at the lowest cost. And that's we're not going to solve that problem, but I think that ends up being at the heart of the issue as far as us finding a way to deliver energy the cheapest way.
Can I move on to another barrier that I'd like to bring up? It's right in your wheelhouse.
Sure, I'll get my point in anyway. That's okay. Go ahead, Jim.
It's the regulatory aspect of all of this, and we're kind of talking around it a little bit. Let me ask you this question, because I was at the Energy Storage Association conference in Denver earlier this year. It was extraordinary. I think there were 1,700 people there. The first conference they had 26 years ago, there were like 12 people. So it's an inflection point as far as that industry, that association is concerned. This year is just a watershed year. And they talked about a FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has a notice of proposed rulemaking that's been out for a while that would provide some standardization around the policies that all the different states are developing. So my question is to those of you that are dealing in this area, is that NOPR needed? I mean, we finally have I'm sorry, that's the short acronym, NOPR, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. We finally have a quorum at the FERC. They finally could vote on something like this, but they probably won't take it up. Would this sort of standardization at the federal level be helpful, or are you going to have to continue to deal with this on a state-by-state basis? And I'm not sure that's Todd's.
Yeah.
But
Kate or Kelly?
Unfortunately, yes, we're going to have to deal with it on a state-by-state basis. But it is helpful. But I think it's more geared towards the ISOs and the rules around what kinds of markets you can participate in with behind-the-meter assets and things like that. But that's. There's still state jurisdiction over a lot of the rules that govern what we do.
Right, Kate, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll make a lot of change here, where we've got a lot of policies already in place and done a lot to adjust the rules, but I think there's a lot of other states that it could speed along.
Could help.
Yeah.
So Todd, just so I don't have to figure out what the question is I should ask you, go right ahead.
Well, I just wanted to interlude, okay? I want to, just correct and make sure folks understand. So first of all, how does my company make money? How do my shareholders make money? Is it by selling more product? No. More kilowatt hours? No. So let's be careful, right? Is it when rates go up? No, I can't. A higher price does not mean actually I make any more money. A higher volume does not mean I make any more money. There is a standard way utilities make money, and that my company makes money, is by spending money in a particular way on capital equipment that counts as in a certain classification, and then we actually say, okay, that investment dollar or $1 billion, it came from the financial community, from bondholders, and we need to pay them back in interest, and shareholders get a rate of return on that. That's how we make money, not by more volume, not by higher prices. So prices go up because costs go up. Prices go down when costs go down. In fact, so that's kind of one important grounding. The second is markets. Because actually, while we are a regulated monopoly, and in our delivery system, the grid, it does seem like it's still a natural monopoly. We could talk about which pieces storage goes at. There's a wholesale market for energy to commodity. And you referred to, Kelly, right, negative prices. So think about commodity prices that are negative. Again, it's very important, location-specific, time-specific. So certain times, prices actually, if you're producing, you have to pay. Why? Because electricity, even with energy storage, electricity is not instantly stored. And so it goes over a network. And it's that network effect that says, you know what, you're producing now? Pay to play. For a variety of reasons. And it actually, from economists, any economists here, right? Actually, that's the marginal cost, right? It actually says, you know what? We want to encourage consumption at that time. We want to charge our batteries. And in fact, if wholesale prices were completely flat every hour of every day, would there be any opportunity for energy storage in that energy market? No. And so if basically there's, energy storage really benefits from volatility in space, in time, in prices, in products across ancillary services and energy. And one of the biggest challenges, you talk about barriers to energy storage, is that it's a wonderful technology with many attributes. In fact, each technology is a little unique. And actually, there's no one market to get enough money from to pay for the capital costs and the installation and make it profitable. But if you can put together a variety of markets together, it actually makes a lot of sense. And so the question is, how do we create institutionally these markets, these structures, to provide that opportunity for any technology, and especially storage, because it provides that, and those markets don't exist today. That's the biggest barrier. And overcoming that multi-use barrier, that's what we need to do.
Yeah, totally agree. They are developing, but we're sort of walking before we run. So we're taking very simple approaches. We provide services to the host customer, we make some money from them, and then we provide services to the utility, we make some money from them. As the markets open up at the wholesale level, then we can participate in other, frequency regulation markets, things like that. But getting to how the utilities make money. So and AMS is actually agnostic as to ownership, but I'll just pretend for a minute we're not. So in SoCal Edison, we're providing storage as a service, as a third party, but many utilities want to own these assets, and in some cases, I think it's driving front of the meter storage project design because it just lends itself much more easily to a utility ownership model.
So
versus
front of the meter meaning on the utility side.
At a utility substation or whatever, versus assets that are on customers' property, and you have really part of the great innovation that we're doing at AMS is designing these contracts that all work together with a customer, with a utility, with the ISO. And it would be very hard for the utility to do that, to deal with all the customers and things like that. So we shouldn't let, I think, ownership issues drive the technology decisions, but we still need to recognize that the utility is really the central player in this, the orchestrator or whatever, and you got to figure out how to make these models copacetic.
Does anyone else want to respond to what Todd said a moment ago?
Well, I think you have a natural advantage if you can kind of group all of the different value streams together. So in my previous life, I worked at an industrial company, and I had found a facility that was basically an islanded grid, and it was the generation, so it had the fuel cost. It was the wires. It had had to deal with any kind of challenges in the grid and any congestion, anything like that. And it was the end user, so if there was an interruption in service, it bore the cost of whatever wasn't produced at the time. And so, I could then stack up each of the different pieces of value and capture it all, right? Internally, because of this unusual structure. You don't really get that in out in the world, in the utility system, maybe with an fully integrated utility where you're doing all of the pieces, you might capture most of it. You still probably won't capture all of the customer side. Here in California, because there is this market, so certain functions are done through the California Independent System Operator market. Certain functions are done at the distribution level, and you can't always pile up the different pieces of value into capturing it. But you are definitely kind of pulling together more of those into capture them, which is great.
So utilities are not known for being labs of innovation, and they typically don't want to do something brand new for the first time. They're very conservative. They want things to work. They're the ones that are responsible for that.
Safe,
reliable. Yes. They want that mobilizing platform to be reliable and safe and environmental. Okay, so given that, are we getting a little more comfortable with the operation of energy storage? Are the operators getting more comfortable and starting to allow providers such as yourselves to stack, the word you used and is used in the industry is stacking, these various benefits or revenue streams? Is that becoming more commonplace so that these do become more economical? Do you see the connection I'm trying to make? For instance, an investor-owned utility says, you're going to build that and it's just going to do this. That's all you're going to get paid for because we want it there 100% of the time. But as you become more comfortable with the operation of your equipment, I think Kate referred to your company as realizing a multiplicity of benefits from energy storage. Is that happening?
I think the utility procurements are. I think, what PG&E is doing, what SoCal Edison is doing, what Con Ed is doing, what's happening in Massachusetts. I would love to fire up some slides and just show everyone what we're talking about, just as
Kelly's
an
slides?
example.
Because I think he might want to show us some example projects that he's done and might give us a sense of the stacking notion as well as other things. Go ahead, Kelly.
Well, also just the, sort of this concept of a totally new idea versus what would be done in a normal utility distribution planning environment, because they wouldn't come up with it. There wouldn't be a reason for them really to. And so, go
ahead and pull the plug on the side there so that we're not all paying attention to that.
If I can, while you're setting up there.
Yeah.
Wait, no, let him finish.
Okay.
Please,
No, I'm cool. Go ahead.
So actually, I agree completely. I mean, when I started out looking wholesale, then transmission, and the last couple of years looking at distribution, and distribution planning is like, okay, actually the horizon of distribution planning is 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. It's not 20 or 30, okay? And they've got certain methodologies and approaches, and it's very much decades old, and it's provided safe, reliable, affordable, right? And so the key question, and California's really pushing it with the distribution resource plan proceeding at the PUC, in a variety of forums, thinking about distribution planning needs to change based upon the proliferation of resource types and customer choice technologies. Absolutely. In fact, the group I'm in, Grid Integration and Innovation, right? One of our tasks is to change the process of distribution planning. So distribution planners do distribution planning. They will do distribution planning in the future. Our job in the group actually is to change the process that they use to do that distribution planning to accommodate and take into account all these resources, these choices, and these opportunities. So absolutely.
Thank you.
You got a clicker here? Yeah. Oh, cool.
The clicker moved.
I think it's still up there.
Sorry. It's right here.
Okay.
Who took the clicker?
So Kelly, go right ahead. Take a few minutes and give us some examples of the kind of projects that your company does.
Quick here. I won't go through all of this stuff because you've seen the duck curve. Oh, wait a second. We're a little bit off here. So SCE has this issue in Southern California where they've decommissioned the San Onofre power plant. They've got the duck curve issue. Then they had Aliso Canyon. And they have, hot spots on their electric grid, specific circuits in populated areas where they need local capacity. And the electrical engineers here, there's things like inertia on the system, where if you don't have large spinning rotors as part of generators, that's how power systems collapse. And with batteries, especially batteries that have 4-quadrant inverters on that, you can basically simulate how a power plant would function to provide spinning reserves and harmonic and reactive power, so you can stabilize the grid that way. The way that we do this stacking of benefits, as we've been calling it, is basically we just have an optimization algorithm that says when a battery will charge and discharge. And we do that, based on a variety of different objective functions that we have with what we're trying to accomplish. So this is just a simple diagram of day in the life of a battery system. So at the top is the load of a commercial industrial building. The bars are actually, this is the battery charging at night, discharging during the day when there's a price differential. So that's really sort of an efficiency play. During the morning, we would be telling the batteries to discharge to reduce the customer's peak demand, and that's a big part of how their energy bill is calculated based on their peak. So we can use the battery for the benefit of the host customer, keeping in mind that we're going to do other things later in the day. Now, our contract with the utility says between certain times of the day, they have a contractual right to tell us to dispatch, discharge the battery, and we drop load dramatically. And so in this case, it'll be 50 megawatts across 100 different projects. And so it's our job to maintain enough juice in the battery to anticipate that probably from 2 to 6 in the afternoon, when the duck curve's ramping up, the utility is going to tell us to drop load. And then when we do that, we basically just flat out, discharge all the batteries. Then the batteries are dead, and then at night, when costs are low, we recharge them. So this is a very simple model of how we're stacking benefits, using a battery to do multiple functions and not conflicting with what we're doing. And in this way, well, let me say, so we have this optimization going on at with one asset at a site. In many cases, we have multiple assets like a backup generator maybe, or like solar or whatever. So we're trying to co-optimize multiple DERs, and then we aggregate up all of those resources and optimize at the utility scale, and that's how we're providing this 50 megawatt virtual power plant to the utility. It's not something that a normal distribution planner would come up with. They would basically say, how do we site a gas turbine? How do we build a new substation? And those are typically the kinds of deferrals that we're looking at with these projects. So these are actual projects that we have in the Southern California area, tied to specific parts of the distribution grid, and then with our software, we basically coordinate these dispatches so that when this is a group of sites, and this is what their aggregated load profile looks, and when SCE gives us a 20-minute signal through a DNP3 connection, we drop load, coordinating it across these different sites. This is actually what the battery output looks like. And sometimes we take more from one site, less from another in terms of kind of what's going on. So under a utility structure, we own these assets with our partner Macquarie Capital. You could do it as a utility owning these assets. It's just a little more problematic. But they're more comfortable with, say, building a large front-of-the-meter storage project here that would have one, be on one site, one owner. We would argue that it limits the number of things you can do with that battery, but that's, everyone's got their own point of view on that. So anyway, I just wanted to, and then what these systems look like. So our clients are like Irvine Companies, one of our big clients, largest commercial property owner in California. We've got Kaiser Hospitals, Walmart, a bunch of water districts, IRWD, IEUA, But anyway, we build these systems so that they kind of blend into these urban environments. They look pretty cool. They're clean. They're quiet. They don't, So this is a totally emissionless power plant located in this area.
So Kelly, are all your assets on the customer side of the meter?
Yes.
Interesting. Barry?
We do have a contract with a front of the meter one, but we haven't built that one yet. So.
Okay, with one of the California investor-owned utilities?
Yeah, SDG&E. Yeah.
With PG&E?
SDG&E. San Diego.
Sorry, I missed a letter there. So Barry, I know that you're interested in the customer side of the meter market. Did you want to add anything with regard to where you see opportunity there?
When you're selling to a utility customer, even if it's not on the utility side of the meter, you're to a certain degree biased towards taking what they're going to offer and buy from you. So you really are a little bit co-opted. I'm just a big fan of making sure that the price signals from rates are going to be consistent with what's going to drive investment, and that's my passion, is on the customer side of the meter, purely customer-owned customer side of the meter.
So you want to add anything in particular? What's the rate fix that's necessary? Dynamic pricing?
Dynamic pricing would work out fine, but when you're looking at getting batteries to pay back right now, you need about a 30 cent a kilowatt hour differential, which you have on. I mean, it's interesting if for residential customers to put it in a system, the standard solar rate. The standard time of use rate, ETOUA or ETOUB, doesn't pay back with arbitrage. It's interesting. It's almost worth buying a used, cheap electric vehicle so you can go on the EV rate, which has a big differential, than sticking with the standard solar rate. That makes sense for solar and
Really?
storage.
So is there a secret there that you're letting out of the bag on rates?
Actually, it's no secret, is that basically the wholesale market that Kate pointed to earlier, there's a big disconnect between retail rates, where Barry is talking about, and the wholesale market. And connecting the two would be really interesting to provide a lot of signals for customers, residential customers, to participate. And there's some institutional barriers and some political barriers there. But it's possible. We see more and more looking forward, and our experience to date, there's been a blending of wholesale and retail markets. And to some extent, the utility rate-making process, which is very heavily regulated. It's not the utility sets rates. The Public Utility Commission sets rates in a very complicated way. 25 years ago, I made a diagram of it. No one in California understood it then. No one understands it now. But it's very complicated for many good reasons, because we're very ambitious and trying to achieve half a dozen policy objectives, right, through rates. Not unlike the tax code.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kate. We need something to counter all of this.
I would actually say there's the area where you're doing your project in Southern California is one of these. It's a great example of where, in partnership with the utility and the way they structured their procurement, they were able to stack some of the different benefits. So some of these transmission and distribution benefits, the customer, in your case, the customer benefit, but also the capacity that was needed at that location. You've got institutional barriers in some states. So Texas, for example, it's an energy-only wholesale market. And then the distribution companies are separate companies. And then there are retail-only companies. And you can't cross those different barriers. It's really difficult. And so there are opportunities in Texas where storage could help ease, certain constraints on the demand on the distribution system, but then they would be, taking in and releasing energy, and so that conflicts with the energy market. And then, the folks who are only in the energy market are like, that's going to warp the market. So you find these sort of siloed pieces that there are reasons they exist, but because storage can cross all these different silos, it's these are the things that we need, policy fixes for to capture.
The unintended consequences of conflicting regulatory policy.
Yeah.
Barry?
Yeah. So when Kelly was showing the pictures of the grid in the LA area, you mentioned that there were some hot spots, and I didn't think about the hot spots you were referring to. I was thinking about the hot spots that are hot right now. I was thinking about what's going on with some of these tremendous fires. We had the same situation up in Sonoma. So, we talk a lot about the pure economics of storage, how it can, all these great things that it does. But when you have grid reliability issues, and there's going to be tens of thousands of people who are no longer connected to the grid that they had before. Maybe the grid's broken, it has to be patched up. But if there is local, commercial, and residential battery storage installed, first of all, these people can benefit from continuing to have power because it could take weeks for them to restore it. But second, there should be ways for those battery systems and solar systems to help provide power to a collapsed grid that may be functioning as a microgrid. So it's really important to think about some of those other advantages because, I don't know, it just seems to be happening more and more often that we're having these problems.
And I think, Barry, you're pointing to the issue of resiliency. It's what we're thinking about, particularly as we feel the effects of climate change. And we see what's happened, not just in northern and southern California, but in Texas and Florida and Puerto Rico. And we see more frequent, more extreme storm events being forecast in our service territory. And so resilience is an important element, and energy storage provides a lot of that. And so the question then becomes, what are we willing to pay for that? And how do we pay for that? And to some extent, to what extent is that resilience a social good, or is it basically those behind gated communities? And really providing the opportunity politically for all of our customers, all of our society to benefit in that resilient way. That's actually a real challenge. The technology is there. The question is, how do we get there kind of politically and institutionally?
So let's do this, Paravi. Let's go ahead and start taking questions from the audience. What we'll do at the end of that period to make sure the audience has an opportunity to ask you questions we may not have gotten to, and there's a lot of things we didn't get to, is I'll come back to each of you for one last closing comment, okay? And then we'll close the panel down. You need my microphone? All right, I'll go up to the podium because I don't want to give up a microphone. I was reminded during our conversation, is this one on?
Yes.
Okay, I was reminded during our conversation, there was one other thing we didn't get to that I think is transformative right now in the regulatory arena, and you're probably all aware of this, that my commission that I was formerly a member of, made a rather unique decision about a month ago, where they basically preemptively denied the permit for a new gas-fired power plant because there are cheaper, more reliable, less polluting opportunities available. And although I don't think they said it, they're pretty sure they're referring to these energy storage projects that are being built in spades. So you must be pretty enamored with this idea, correct? And I would think that the investor-owned utilities, represented today here by Dr. Strauss, would also get pretty enamored because this is more stuff that you could rate base. It's not a power plant.
Believe me, right? When shareholder incentives are not aligned with customer incentives, that's not in the interest of shareholders. And actually not looking to own stuff that's not economic.
It's good to hear you say
What's really interesting is that it seems like, and we'll see how the integrated resource plan proceeding plays out at the PUC, it seems like the marginal resource for capacity may not be a gas-fired combined cycle plant or a peaker plant. It may be something else. It may be demand response.
Right.
It may be energy storage. And that's really interesting.
Okay, good. So I'm sorry. I took us down another path. If you have a question, please raise your hand. And please stand and identify yourself. I think that's always helpful. And if you want to direct it to someone, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll just assume it's open. Is the microphone on, please?
I think so.
Good.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for insightful discussion. I'm Angela Chuang from the Electric Power Research Institute, and I have a question about retail rate reform. As you know, there's a lot of talk for storage to the values to be captured, especially at the residential level where the rates are relatively flat or inverted, block tier rates. that we need rate reform, a better alignment with wholesale markets. And the early resistance towards that, as even with utilities are on the track of reforming the rates, has been the solar industry. And we've seen that in states like Arizona, for example. However, as solar industry becomes solar plus storage, have we turned the corner, or when are we going to turn the corner where that industry is more accepting towards rate reform and demand charges and so on?
I think your question is for the solar industry, and I see three battery. Well, actually, energy storage, right? So it's not solar and storage. So maybe Barry. I don't know. It's
No, I spend an enormous amount of time advocating for rates that are not penalizing solar and storage. And the impediment usually is we're arguing against our utility competitors on that. I don't see that issue going away because it's really just a struggle of profits. Utilities want to keep the rates higher and benefits them.
Wait. Make sure. All right. How do we make money? What it is actually, it's which of our customers pay more and which of our customers pay less. So it's actually one of customer cost allocation among different customer types, whether they have solar or storage or it's multifamily and low income. It's not actually about utility profits, this discussion.
I'm just going to correct that a little bit. The rates are set so that the utilities can make sure that they're going to get that. I think it's 10.5% in PG&E's case, guaranteed rate of return. So if for whatever reason they're not selling enough electricity because of solar, then they're allowed to raise the rates so that they can continue to hit that rate of return on their net assets. So it's a really, I don't know what the solution is as far as your specific question about how to do this. All I know is I've been advocating for 15 years for rates that would reflect the benefits that solar is providing and to reflect the benefits that solar and storage are providing right now for business and consumers who basically can get power cheaper than what they're paying for from the utility. I'm sure.
Good. We can go to another question unless you want to.
Let me
Go ahead.
Go ahead. What's happening at SDG&E? So they have a critical peak period, which was, I think, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then, based on their costs of power and everything, they moved the critical peak period to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And the San Diego School District sued because they had made big investments in solar, and just when their solar panels were going dark, the rates would shoot up. And so storage is a very effective arbitrage tool. And if you had a storage system, you would basically say, oh, that's fine, because we can move load around and we can respond to these changes in tariffs. And that's just one function of storage, but it's certainly solar plus storage helps make a more, durable benefit stream, given that tariffs are going to change and you're not quite sure where they're going to go.
Well, and so one of the things that's happening now with rates, and I'm on these calls every week, is the rates are not diverging. They're getting closer. They're getting flatter. But on the wholesale side, they're crazy. I mean, they're negative and then they're very positive. So there's a big differential between what the utilities are paying for power going out to the grid on the wholesale level and what customers are paying. As those rates flatten, we're getting more towards a situation where it's like, hey, it's fixed. It doesn't matter when you're going to use the power.
So Todd, I'd prefer that we move on.
Sure.
But the point to take away from this is just California. This is just talking about certain rates, which we have dozens of them. This is just one state, and in fact, it's very complicated. And you can see when you tweak one little aspect of it, it can change a lot of things for customers. So that's why maybe some standardization at the federal level might be very helpful with regard to not just energy storage, but some of these policies in general. Let's go to this side of the room and take another question. Go, please. We'll try and be equitable and move it around as much as we can and get as many in as we can. Go right ahead. Identify yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lang with Bank of America Merrill Lynch in the Renewable Energy Group. I haven't heard anyone tonight mention community choice aggregators. I'm curious if they're interested in storage, procuring it, if storage plays a role with how they're changing the market in California.
I haven't really seen them procuring utility scale systems. at least, not kind of for the time frames in which, I'd be looking to sell a system.
And I think I can help give you a brief answer on that subject. I've been advocating this area for the last 2 or 3 years. The reality is CCAs, or community choice energy agencies, have not really built a whole lot of solar yet, or renewable, so they're not going to have a great deal of demand. But I can tell you, having attended a number of the different meetings, organizing meetings and such, there are energy storage and renewables companies that attend those meetings because they see opportunity. It's not there yet. So is that fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to, I just think that's the short answer to that question. So let's go ahead and pick another one, please.
Hi, I'm Marcos Ramanos. I come from Europe, actually. We come with a startup from Spain. So it's really interesting. We have been actually speaking with many CCAs. We are really interested in the community scale and optimization at that level. And a matter that came up a lot, we all agreed, was integration. We heard a lot of integration. We heard a lot of opening markets and providing information. And the main question is particularly to PG&E, basically, because it's a very surprising model that we have met here in California. This integration, how big part of this integration is digitalization and opening, giving transparent information to other players who are like utility scales, or to even consumers to know exactly where their energy comes from?
I think that's a big opportunity, and I think that's something that California policy is interested in exploring. And the question there becomes, the one hesitation. It's like, I'm always sorry to want to pour cold water and everything, but it's like, I've seen Wells Fargo, I saw Equifax. I don't think we've heard of a utility leak of millions of customer data information yet, and we're paranoid about cybersecurity. And so the question becomes, this is your information, right, in our systems. And so the question becomes how to make sure we provide that digital access in a way that maintains cybersecurity. And that's really a key challenge we're wrestling with.
Harry, you want to ask a question?
Hi, Harry DeVito, Intech Power Services. Has anyone put together a comprehensive proposal for a tariff structure that would capture the different value components of storage? I'm not asking whether it's in place. I'm asking, has anyone even put together what is recognized to be an acceptable structure for someone building an independent storage project to sell into the grid that captures that, under which, through their revenue that they are paid, they capture all the different aspects of the benefits of energy storage? Has it even been put together academically, through a utility, anywhere?
I think it's sort of going in phases, and I think ultimately you'd like to get to either tariffs or markets that have these kinds of pricing mechanisms, a way of monetizing things. I think right now the proxy is these utility procurements and bilaterals are power purchase agreements that are being done that allows a developer like us to monetize these benefits.
Yeah, I think you can, through the markets, capture those benefits that are captured within, say, the California Independent System Operator. So you can get paid or pay to charge, depending on whether it's negative or positive pricing. You can sell into the market, hopefully at a higher price than you paid to charge. And then you can also do various ancillary services, like provide spinning reserve or provide frequency regulation and get paid for those services. What that wouldn't capture, and you'd have to find another way to get that benefit, is if the system is also in a location on the grid where there is some sort of deferral value or grid service that it's providing to help the distribution grid. And so it's not complete as of now in California anyway.
6 or 7 years ago, I think it was a utility in Austin created what's called a value of solar tariff, VOST. So it was done for solar, and I'm sure that they're academic. There's probably a paper out there that has done something very similar for storage.
So you may not be able to answer this, but isn't this what the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's proposed rule is attempting to do, is provide some standardization around the value streams or the stacking for energy storage? Isn't that the answer?
I mean, the challenge is they're not always the same all the time.
Different. Go ahead, please, Todd.
You asked, is there a framework? Does it exist? The answer is yes. And there are working groups, and there are frameworks, and PG's been a participant in them. And so the answer is, when are they kind of ready for more wider public consumption? In what form? So the answer is stay tuned in the coming weeks and months.
Let's take another question on this side. Is there another question here?
Paul Kelleher, I'm with Primus Power. We're a flow battery company.
Excellent. A flow battery company. Good.
And, the storage plus solar are natural partners. But I appreciate hearing the panel comment on the relationship between net metering and the benefits that are available to storage in the California market right now.
Can you give them some more information? I mean, what are you looking for? What do you want them to answer?
Net metering is the ultimate battery, and so if you're in the business of selling batteries, any net metering beneficiary, which is just about every solar project less than a megawatt under NEM 1 and under 3 megawatts under net metering 2, is already getting the benefits of the ultimate battery, which is the utility grid. And so
the ultimate battery. There you go. He said it, not me.
And if you're trying to sell batteries, we actually have to avoid the net metered marketplace, because there is no battery opportunity there, as Barry has
That's why I'm selling it to the ultimate.
So this is the point, right?
Thank
Earlier
you.
it was what do we think about arbitrage of customer demand charges, net metering? Oh, it favors solar, but it disadvantages storage. And so, this is, I think, Jeff, you pointed earlier, the unintended consequence of each kind of siloed, well-intended regulation. And that's kind of, but that's the glory of California as we kind of make incremental progress, right? What's the alternative? The New York approach. Top-down, large vision, and the question is what happens on the ground? And California's like, we're going to try lots of different things simultaneously, see what works, and that's how we get to the future. And that's been the history of California for 150 years.
Yeah, and New York system is nowhere right now. They're
Exactly.
still talking.
Exactly. And so that's so the answer. So these things, it's a game of whack-a-mole. It's a game of the challenge that way. But it's like that's why it engages all of us as we try to attain that future for California, for our society, for the world in terms of climate change. And California's been doing this for 150 years. And in the energy space, it's been decades. So, we can handle that.
Thank you. It's a good question. So I apologize, but we're going to try and keep the train on schedule, just so that we're respectful of everyone's time. Let's go in reverse order, if you would. Just take a minute and just give me a sense of something you may not have gotten to that you want to make sure the audience hears, or what you think might be the main takeaway that you want them to have. Just take a minute or so and make your final comment. Kelly, why don't you go first?
Well, the one thing we didn't talk a lot about is resiliency and reliability. And so a lot of people, when they think of storage, that's the first thing they think of. And it's actually the hardest thing to monetize.
Yes.
And we're really struggling with this in terms of we basically, all we need to do is put in a fast transfer switch on our projects to make it easier to island and provide backup power from the batteries. And you start talking to customers about, well, will you pay this extra amount for it? And it's a fraction of the cost of the total system. And they're like, no, that's okay. It's, these are large, sophisticated buyers too. I think they just are looking for it for free. But there is this concept, some people call it the agile fractal grid, or where you have these DERs and these storage systems, and when you have like a major outage, being able to use these assets to bring the grid back up online quicker in this sort of islanding approach versus, one feeder at a time, and you'll eventually get down to there. And I think that's an area that has been really underexplored in terms of how to unlock the value of resiliency and reliability from batteries.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Strauss.
So I open with the grid as the enabling platform and PG&E as the integrator. I want to leave you with PG&E as the innovator. Because, yes, all the accusations you've heard, that's your grandfather's utility. That's actually not the way the utility is today. For example, this morning in Oakland, we announced an all-source RFO to replace an aging peaker plant that I think was a really high heat rate, very thermodynamically inefficient, using a really dirty fuel. I think it was fuel oil or diesel or something. It was a jet engine, right? Replacing it with an RFO, okay? All sources looking for distributed energy resources, right? We're not looking at the wire solution. We're not looking to underground hundreds of $millions a line and rip up the streets of downtown Oakland. We're trying to say, what's our portfolio of energy resources to meet the needs for the customers and deliver that reliably. And my team has spent a lot of time trying to analyze what are the parameters and characteristics for that portfolio of possible resources to meet those needs. So PG&E is not just the integrator, we're the innovator moving ahead from today into the future.
Congratulations. PG&E, there's no doubt about it. Todd has one of the more difficult jobs than anybody in the room. And I say that about a lot of PG&E positions. Please, Kate.
Sure. So, I think moving forward, we've been talking a little bit about in front of the meter, behind the meter. I think the future has storage at lots of different points on the grid. And the way we see the future, we see a future where we electrify everything. And this is coming with electric vehicles. You move a lot of your kind of home heating, various other types of things, ultimately to electricity. You really accelerate the renewable adoption, and then you transform the grid with our favorite topic here, energy storage. And that's kind of where we see the future.
Thank you, Kate. And Barry, you have the last word.
That's a big responsibility there. Well, just two things that are at the top of my mind pretty much every day when I'm looking at providing systems for customers is one, looking forward to rate design that's going to reflect their ability to monetize their investment, just as a utility is able to monetize their investment when they're putting in the equipment. And the second thing that just helps me wake up every morning is that I know with 100% certainty that the cost for these systems will continue to come down at a breathtaking pace, and we will be looking at a transformation of the way we all get our electricity. I'm not sure if it's going to be, it's definitely not going to be the utility of our grandfather. I'm not smart enough to be able to foresee what it's going to be, but I'm pretty sure it's going to have a lot of self-generation and a lot of storage in it.
So thank you all very much. Listen, before I turn this, wait just a moment. Before I turn this back over to Paravi, I want to thank you all. Such an attentive audience, really good questions. I am so sorry that we could not get to more. Maybe we'll go to a 3-hour panel sometime in the future. Now, please thank our panelists for being here.